on The Agenda with Steve Paikin.
Since the surge began, high-profile terrorist attacks are down, civilian deaths are down, sectarian killings are down, and our own casualties are down.
Is it the surge or something else?
Some say the fall in the US military deaths is the result of deals cut with Sunni militia and tribal leaders. Once insurgents, these men used to be considered part of the problem.
Retired U.S. Army Colonel Douglas Macgregor on America's efforts to buy stability in Iraq.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin.
And joining us now on the line from Washington, D.C., Colonel Douglas Macgregor, retired from the U.S. Army, the author of Transformation Under Fire. Colonel Macgregor, good of you to join us. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Can I start with a quote of yours that you wrote back in January for Defense News, and it goes like this. Of the many factors contributing to the reduction of U.S. casualties in Iraq, none has been more critical than the decision by the generals in Baghdad to pay more than 80,000 of Iraq's Sunni Arab insurgents $250 million a year not to shoot at U.S. forces. Must confess, when I read that in your piece, I hadn't heard it before. So my first question to you is, how do you know that's true?
Well, I know it from my sources in Baghdad. I know it from my sources inside the United States Army. And quite frankly, if you put that question to the U.S. military authorities or to the political leadership, they'll tell you the truth. What they will do, though, however, is provide you with a somewhat misleading picture. They will call the former Sunni insurgents that are now effectively U.S. supported and paid Sunni militias concerned citizens or volunteers for Iraqi security and so forth, trying to convey the impression that these are very modest, unchallenging, unthreatening entities, when in reality what we've done is cut a deal with all the Sunni insurgents who are willing to do business with us, because not all have, but large numbers have. And the deal was very simple. We will pay you X number of dollars on a routine basis, for the most part it's about $10 a day. At the same time, we're effectively conferring autonomy or political independence on the Sunni community, the Sunni insurgent community, that is, that really hates the Shiite government in Baghdad that we've set up.
But since the days of the Roman Empire, big countries have been buying off smaller countries, right, for thousands of years. So there's nothing particularly new about this, is there?
Well, we're not buying off a country. We're really buying off what are effectively tribal entities. Most of the Sunni insurgents, regardless of what they belong to, the 1920 Jihad or the Jihadist Army, there are all sorts of different names that they go by, all have tribal connections. And so what we've done is we've turned to the Sunni population's insurgent elements and said, you know, listen, we'll support you with some money, and we'll give you some autonomy from the government that you hate. You help us drive out the very small percentage of al-Qaeda foreign fighters that you don't like and that we don't like, and at the same time we'll help you survive the Shiite majority. So it's kind of a buy-off on a tribal level more than a country purchase, although
okay,
you can make a very good...
What about the notion, though, that it's paying off enemies as opposed to countries? That's not new either, though, paying off your enemy, right?
No, it isn't. It's an old imperial practice. The British did it many times. The French have done it. The Italians have done it. All the great imperial powers from time to time have engaged in this.
In which case, if it works, in other words, if it does, in fact, quell the violence in the area that we're talking about, are you in favor of it?
Well, I would be in favor of it if we intended to leave. And let me explain the difference. The British paid off some of these tribes, particularly the tribes in what is today northern Pakistan, tribes in the upper Sudan, many different places, while they simultaneously extracted billions of dollars in profit from the empire. So paying a few million pounds a year on a global basis to a very small number of troublesome tribes was, quite frankly, not very challenging financially, and it made good economic sense. And remember that the previous empires were not committed to transforming their populations into Anglo-Saxon Democrats, particularly the British Empire. It was a profit-oriented operation, certainly until World War I. What we've done is not pay off some people not to shoot at us, to temporarily cooperate with us for the purpose of getting out of Iraq. We're actually reinforcing the division in the country. we're setting up Sunni-backed militias whose real aims and goals are unchanged, which in addition to ejecting us from the country, it's to defeat the Shiite majority, which has come to power under our sponsorship. So it's a little different situation what we've done, and it's a very dangerous one because over time this is not going to last. There is no goodwill, there is no winning of hearts and minds. This is a temporary expedient, I think more than anything else, to get us to the November election without talking very much about Iraq.
You know, of course, that Muqtada al-Sadr has decided to extend the ceasefire that his Mahdi army has enjoyed for the last while. Is it reasonable to assume that you know, he's enjoying the same kind of payoffs from U.S. officials as the others you've been discussing here?
Well, I don't have the hard evidence for the payments to Muqtada al-Sadr, although that has been stated by many different people, and I have heard that he is also being compensated. I wouldn't be surprised. We're spending about $12 billion a month in Iraq now, according to Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel Prize-winning economist who has studied this carefully. So a few $100 million here or there, I'm sure, won't be missed from the coffers in Baghdad that General Petraeus has got. I don't think Muqtada al-Sadr's extension of the ceasefire, though, is quite what it's cracked up to be. There's a lot of evidence that he has granted limited authority to many of his subordinate elements to conduct attacks in so-called self-defense against the Iranian-backed government, which is really what you've got with Maliki and his Badr Brigade, which is an Iranian-trained organization that works with us, and at the same time attacks against us. So I think the ceasefire should be taken with a grain of salt. Let's see how the next several months play out. Obviously, Muqtada al-Sadr has an interest right now in surviving and preserving his military power. So there's no point in taking on multiple enemies simultaneously. But I would expect continued limited attacks. By the way, just within the last few days, there have been a number of rocket attacks on the so-called Green Zone, the American secured military zone in Baghdad, and those came from what we think are Shiite militias.
Is the suggestion here that people are taking their compensation from the U.S. and just biding their time, waiting for the time when the U.S. leaves, and then who knows?
Well, I think there's some of that. They may not wait really for us to leave, to be blunt. There are a lot of problems right now on the ground in Iraq. One of the officers who works in Baghdad told me recently, you know, you reach one strategic inflection point. You think you've gained some ground only to discover several more so-called strategic inflection points. In other words, this is a very fragile environment where alliances are shifting and changing all the time. These are Muslim Arabs. Collectively, they want to get rid of us. But as long as we are there and we don't seem to be interested in leaving, they will exploit us for whatever they can get because there is a struggle inside Muslim Arab Iraq for power. We are a co-participant or co-belligerent, sadly, in this struggle. So as long as we are there, they'll try to exploit us. But at some point, I think we risk an explosion. Whether that comes late this summer or in the fall or next year is unclear. But at some point, we risk being shot at by everyone.